Now, of course, Africa has some high expectations for this meeting, and joining us to take apart what the continent is looking forward to from the G7 leaders meeting is Professor Zachary Bolo Owino. He is from the University of Nairobi's School of Business. Great to have you with us today, Professor. Now, what many in Africa are expecting from this meeting is a realistic and clear vaccine roadmap, which, of course, talks about shared doses, access to manufacturing capacity, financing, and of course an end to hoarding. So far, looking at what has happened, has the meeting delivered on this? Are you satisfied with what you're hearing?
Now, what I'm hearing from the summit, the G7, is not very clear as to how they are going to deliver on the vaccines to the African countries. They have only mentioned that they are going to take responsibility of the delivery of those vaccines, but as to how it's going to happen, it's not very, very clear because Africa is ravaged with poor infrastructure, economic crisis, poverty, climate change, and financial crisis. And they need to really be very clear and specific on how it's going to be done. It's a continent that is diverse. And from what has been happening in the past is that quite a number of countries have not been able to even to secure the vaccines. From the countries that manufactures them, from the source of manufacturing. And that is a very, very fundamental crisis where only 1% of the population of African countries have been able to be vaccinated, compared to what is happening in the United States, where over 60% have been vaccinated. Quite a number of population in Europe, especially in the Great Britain, has been vaccinated. So the G7 needs to be very, very clear on how they are going to deliver on their promises, and how the manufacturing, the supply chain is going to work, especially when even now, as we know it for sure, it's not very promising. The COVID-19 effect in itself has delinked so many, the logistics that cuts across the various countries in Africa.
Quite right. Now, of course, following the recent Paris summit, we were also looking to hear more on the progress on those discussions around green recovery financing, certainly leveraging the IMF special drawing rights, how much of it will come to Africa, and of course, meeting the $100 billion climate finance pledge. Do you feel you've heard these issues addressed? And certainly, are you convinced that there is will amongst the G7 nations to make solid moves in these areas?
Now, I think the summit has just started, but again, they have not properly mentioned how they are going to look at these issues. But I have a very, very optimistic feeling that the African, I mean, the, the move to get this done will take place, especially on the climate change, given the fact that the United States has been able to rejoin the climate change, and given the fact that the relationship of the United States and the other members of the G7 countries is improving. So in my view, I think they are going to deliver because there is goodwill, and the United States is taking the lead as far as we are concerned. And the Biden's government has really taken a positive approach towards getting all this done. So I think, in my view, it's going to be delivered.
Well, as you mentioned, discussions are just picking up at the G7. But how effective have follow-up mechanisms been after previous G7 meetings, especially on issues to do with Africa?
Now, the follow-up mechanism has not been very, very, the roadmap and of course, how the promises that have been made in the G7 discussions and pledges, that has not been very clear as to how it's going to be done. The follow-up mechanism is still very, very vague. The approach on how to get this done, the timelines is not well stated. And even all those pledges that were made in the previous summit, it is not known how it's going to be achieved. Basically, we are seeing only a situation where countries, members of the G7, are making promises. But how it's going to be achieved in retrospect and how it's going to be done is still very, very unclear to us. So I think those promises, those pledges should be, there should be a very clear timelines of how those promises is going to be achieved. And to my view, that is still gray, it is lacking, it is not known, and I suppose that clear mechanisms should be put in place so that we see a more robust approach of how those promises is going to be achieved, especially for the African continent.
As you say, Professor, the devil will be in the details. Many thanks for your insights today. We do have to leave it there. That, of course, is Professor Zachary Bolo Owino from the University of Nairobi's School of Business.